They'll blanket you in Wi-Fi and profit off the radiation. Congregation collecting the people for that Satan. I keeps it blazing, cause I can read between the lines. I ain't blind, we unwind what they're really saying. Genetically modify what you're tasting. Don't need that cottage promise, so now you live up in your mom's basement. Redesign time so your mind is always wasted. Programmed to crave the basics. Keep the beta in stasis. Pay the state, kid. You're in debt for being born. Messengers are more than just the price for being warned. Don't be alarmed, disconnect from their machinations. Stop subscribing to the folly of own nations. Bone breaking ain't the answer, cause they seek the ownership of souls. Spread the seeds and watch them grow. Break the chains of control. Break the chains of control.
Sweet eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. It is a bright winter up in here, and we are rolling through the goodness with nothing but great friends and bonds beyond family to carry us right through this grand unveiling of the apocalypse. And tonight, we are blessed to roll along with the beautiful soul, thoughtful mind, loving heart, and genius of the creator and host of the awesome podcast, My Family Thinks I'm Crazy, and co-host and co-guest and producer of many amazing shows such as Tinfoil Hat with Sam Tripoli. Tonight, we have Mark Steeves here. Mark, it is so nice to have you here on Rogue Ways.
Thank you. I think that's the best intro I've ever had on a podcast. That's fantastic.
I aim to please. I try real hard. I learned from the best, and that is Greg Carlwood, if he doesn't mind me saying so. So props go to him. But if you're listening out there and you need a pick-me-up spiritually, or just some good love, or some nice artistic endeavor, or just anything that will just sort of uplift you and keep you connected, head over to rogueways.org. There's tarot readings, there's organite pendants, there's guidance sessions, there's classes, there's poetry, there's prose, there's articles, there's all kinds of art and good stuff there. So check it out and connect deeper, and also go over to rogue.locals.com to join the community. We've got so much cool content and good people there, and it is a great space, and it's also a great way to support what you love, which is Rogue Ways. So go over and help keep it going. And Mark, we always do a pointless question of the episode at the beginning, so I was going to ask you, what is the best trip, vacation, or travel that you have ever had?
Well, the best travel I've ever done was my road trip to Colorado in the summer of 2016. It almost ended in disaster, and if I got into the story, it might take the whole podcast, but it was great.
What was so great about it? What made it awesome?
Well, just that I'm a big pothead, so being in a legal state was great. For the first time, it was kind of inaugurated. And then my buddy Jay was working there for a summer, so we got to stay at an actual house rather than a hotel or something. And it was just a really cool experience to be able to feel like I lived in Denver for a week,
That's pretty cool. Yeah, and road trips are fun in general, and I love exploring the United States. Just because I did so much international traveling that the United States, I was like, how did I not explore my own country? Like it's almost like we have like 16 different countries here in one, with all our different bioregions and areas. We're like, it's an amazing country to explore. So I totally feel it. But I love to ask Mark what the background is, like how you got to where you are. So if you want to tell us maybe a little bit about your sort of younger days and what influenced you to end up where you are today, how might you throw that at us?
Yeah, I mean, this could take the whole episode, honestly.
Yeah.
I love talking about this. I think it's important because it's something that people can listen to and relate to and help elaborate on their own personal journey,
Exactly.
So I guess I'll start by saying I've always been someone who's been fascinated by nature, right? So when I was a kid, I was always reading nonfiction books about nature and animals and all these different things. So I think that laid the foundation for the capacity to learn this type of stuff. Obviously, those interests, animals to conspiracies, there's not a direct bridge there, but
you'd think
for
so,
me, there
but
was.
It's pretty common in our past when I ask people this question, so there must be something.
Yeah. So that was the beginning, and then I was always kind of the oddball black sheep, as many of us are. And on top of that, I'm 6'8", and I've always been the tallest typically in the class, so always stood out. So then around, teenage years, smoking weed, I think, was a big breakthrough for me. And we can get into cannabis more and what I've researched, and why I think it was so fundamental to where I am now. But yeah, cannabis and martial arts were kind of like the third, the next two things to the foundation, So I was very interested in learning about the world around me, interested in martial arts, and interested in cannabis. And that kind of developed into a kind of spiritual outlook, because what I realized when I started getting high by myself, smoking, a pipe, or eventually I moved on to mixing it with tobacco, which I can also elaborate on and why I think that's important. But yeah, so I just had this really, I can only describe it as like a wiping the slate clean type feeling. And it can't be isolated to one day, but it was probably a series of events as I was just, going through this self-discovery of like coming home from school and like smoking a bong in my room and then like running around in the woods or whatever.
Yeah.
So
dude, it's like it opened you up, and then you went out to learn from the real masters, which are like the trees and the sky and the sun.
Yeah, and where I live, I mean, I kind of, I guess, spoke out of turn by saying smoke a bong in the house, because really we were smoking bongs in the woods and in cars and anywhere where we wouldn't get caught. So, but yeah, indeed, hiking was always a big part of it. I've always liked to hike, and part of Connecticut that I live in is pretty wild. It's not that urban, even though we're not far from an urban area. So it's a good balance. I think I have more wildlife at my disposal than you might look at just by, my immediate surroundings, Like the other day I was in Barkhamsted, Connecticut, which is, I mean, you can't even get cell phone service up there. It's great. And yeah, I mean, once you separate yourself from the herd in that sense, it has an effect on you spiritually. And that's something that was a theme for me growing up. Like I said, I was kind of a black sheep, but I've always been extroverted. I've always liked to talk and make friends and whatnot. So I've never been completely by myself. But I think that was a major component, because I noticed with my peers, they would only smoke weed as a social activity. They would never use it for introspection and meditation. So then when alcohol came along, that got added to the lump, and then other drugs get added to the lump. And then next thing you know, there's no self-discovery. It's just, this kind of void that they begin to try to fill,
Yeah.
So that was never my thing. I've never used alcohol in that way. Even though I do drink occasionally, I think the problem with alcohol is the amount of fluoride in it. I think that if we made alcohol the way they did in like ancient times, it might have a different effect.
Throw some spring water in with some like sour mash or whatever it is. Like,
if you're in like a granola-y part of the country, you could probably get that now, but still, the majority of people are drinking fluoride and sugar and wheat.
And I think, and the wheat. And like the glyphosates are all up in the wheat and shit. And so that has to have an effect too. And, and I wonder, and I feel this way about marijuana now too. So I'd love to know your point of view on this, but I feel like, we have more and more concentrated. So we have like higher and higher alcohols. For example, when I was still drinking, I was getting beers that were like 10%. And I'm like, that's like hardly beer at that point, And I wonder what the sort of like natural or common percentage was kind of back in the day, when it was more like something that you did to keep liquid around in a form that didn't necessarily spoil or whatever. Like there was towns who survived winters because they had beer. They didn't have flowing water, but they had beer. So that all makes sense to me, And then weed is kind of similar. Like when we were young, I don't know how old you are, but I'm just assuming we're kind of similar age. When we were young, weed was like, I don't know. I don't even claim to know. There was some sticky, icky, like gooey ass, nice purple crystally bud, but it was nothing like fucking, like shatter and like this shit they have now, which I'm not opposed to. I'm just like not into it. And I imagine if you're a child and instead of finding your like dad's homegrown weed, you're like getting that shit and like smoking dabs, like this is not really the same thing anymore. And I almost wonder if it's been weaponized.
No, it has. It absolutely has. I think that concentrated cannabis is weaponized for sure, and that's why the vehicle of use is the exact same thing as a jewel pod, because what are they doing with the tobacco? They're getting you all these kids hooked in with the fruity flavors. And there's one of my best friend's cousins is that age, like 15, 16, and he's doing the dab pens, and it whacks you out, I think it definitely gets you very high. And I mean, I've done it, so I know that you can still do it responsibly. But I'll tell you what, the days that I did take a dab were not productive days at all. Whereas I can smoke and do research, have a podcast,
It's like
drive a car.
yeah, it's like the difference between microdosing and just full on tripping on shrooms, like microdosing you can like use it in this very like productive and healing, meditative, like all these cool things.
Think about the alchemical process. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the creator created these plants the way they are for a reason. Now, depending on environmental conditions, you can get some really strong marijuana, right? But because of the vehicle of entry, like the flame, you're never going to get to a point where it's like 40, 50, 60, 80%.
Yeah.
Because what do you do with a dab? You get the right temperature, right? You have it all alchemically broken down to its smallest parts, the only part of it that gets you high. I mean, to me, that's what big pharma is. That's what big pharma has done with all of their so-called pharmacopoeia, which used to just be a word for sorcery. And why would sorcery have anything to do with herbs? Well, because in those days, healing and sorcery were kind of the same thing. I mean, people really didn't have, good grasp on I don't want to say that. I'm going to check that back. I would say people had a better grasp back then on what actually heals you. Whereas now we have this phony baloney materialist chemical carpet bomb approach with a cleaver instead of a scalpel. So
which is a piece of it. Like chemicals are a piece of it, right? But like you said, we've just like cut out everything else and we're like just flooding that. And it's like, well, you're like ignoring the other bodies that you have. You don't just have this physical body.
But there's a balance in nature, and like you just said, there's a physical body, there's an energy signature to a plant. So you're not just getting like the THC when you smoke. I believe you're getting the frequency that plant was grown in. I mean, if you have a farm of people who grow really good food, I would argue that it's because those people love what they do. And they put their heart and soul into their farm. Yeah. And that goes for cannabis just as much as it does tomatoes, so
it's like the vibe, like you're talking about, literally the vibration of it, the energy that's been put into it, and then like the structure of that energy, but also the consciousness of that specific plant. Like I like talk to my plants because I'm that kind of a person, and they've got like their own little energy signatures and personalities and consciousness. And I imagine if I were to like more deeply commune with each one, I would experience that even more. And you're taking that into you.
Consider the kind of saying, I guess it is, that weed is stronger now than it used to be, right? People, old timers, that's what they say, weed is stronger than it used to be. Well, I would argue that the reason why their weed was so weak was because not only was it being brought to them by a group of criminals, but it was shipped halfway across the world. Now we're growing plants in an environment that we live in and smoking them, like that makes a difference. I don't live in Vietnam. I don't live in Cambodia. I don't live in Laos. So if you get a Thai stick of cannabis in the 80s and you smoke it, I mean, I don't want to I don't know. I'm too young for that, but still, I would say that that might be something to do with it. And like I said, the criminal, nefarious element that was associated with it, and the CIA and all that. So
Yeah, some
I think
dark
that
magic up in those roots.
yeah, and consciousness is easily tainted. I mean, that's the Masaru Emoto study that we talked about in our Mega Swap cast that we did. You remember that?
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, cannabis was the kind of thing for me. Like I said, it wiped the slate clean, but it also put me in touch with my intuition, and that's when I started finding the threads, right? So I would
The
find a
synchro
book like
rolls.
exactly, yeah, it did put me in touch with the synchronicities, and I found a book called The Tales of Don Juan. It's about this shaman in Mexico. He's written by Carlos Castaneda.
Yeah.
Some people say it's all fiction, but
Well,
I don't.
any good fiction will have deeper wisdom in it than most nonfiction, and you often
Yeah.
have to fictionalize the truth when it gets too weird, or else people can't handle it. So who knows what kind of mix it is, but it definitely has a super deep wisdom, in it.
Yeah, that was a one book. Then there was the crystals. I had a friend who gave me some obsidian, and that kind of sparked the journey into gathering crystals. Next thing you know, I got these huge crystals lying around.
Yeah.
You know, so they're everywhere now. But yeah, that was. Then there was The Secret History of the World by Mark Booth. That was another big one for me. And around that time when I was experiencing all that, I was going to school in New Haven, Connecticut. And if you're not familiar, you might be familiar with the town and you didn't even know it, because it's the home of Skull and Bones, right?
Wow.
Yale University and Skull and Bones. So there's a certain amount of conspiracy tied into the town and the framework. And I met a character at the public green, which is only a block away from their headquarters, so to speak. And it's very obvious. They don't hide it. It's like a weird Egyptian building
Weird.
on High Street, if you're ever visiting. But yeah, so I'm chilling in the park, doing what I normally did between classes, smoking weed. And I ran into a fellow who happened to be from Arizona. He was a Native American, a part of a tribe, not Apache, but associated with the Apache. I don't remember the name. But we became friends because I had a shirt on with Geronimo's face on it. And that led to me meeting up with him there, just never planning it. Like, we never exchanged phone numbers. It was always just because he didn't have a phone. So I probably asked him, but yeah, so I would just see him there, we'd talk and he'd teach me stuff that I was interested in learning about, because I've always been fascinated in Native American culture, but that added a whole nother layer to it. So he's teaching me about cannabis and how it's properly used. And I had already had hints of this, but when I actually learned that, the Native Americans use herbs and plants to pray, like tobacco, I've kind of realized that there was something much larger at hand. And the reason why I was seeing all this stuff that other people weren't seeing, it wasn't just the weed. It was the fact that there was an awakening going on within myself, and this was contributing to it. So,
Yeah.
That, and the fact that he was only in New Haven because of Skull and Bones. He came to New Haven because his ancestor was Geronimo, right? Maybe not like his direct grandfather, but a member of his ancestry that he felt had been disrespected, because if anyone doesn't know, Geronimo's skull and femur bones were robbed from his grave by Prescott Bush, the father of George H.W. Bush, and brought to the Skull and Bones tomb for one of their rituals. Now, why would they do that, Mark? I don't know.
And why does nobody care?
Yeah, what that?
Oh,
Thank
boys
you.
will be boys. I'm like, dude, what the? That's fucking weird. Like if someone else did that, they would use it to like completely discredit and ruin them. If I went and did that, they'd be like, but they can do it and it's totally cool. It's just a little boy's trick.
Well, it happened in the 1800s. Or no, I'm sorry. It was post World War One that it happened.
Early 20th
Because this
century,
is Prescott Bush we're talking about. But Geronimo died in the mid 1800s. So he had been buried for at least 50 years before they robbed his grave. And the most powerful thing, I mean, you can just pick anybody out of a lineup and they might know this story. So you're probably thinking like, oh, cool, Mark, some homeless guy taught you all this stuff. Like, what's the big deal? Well, he really was a member of a tribe, and he taught me about the sweat lodges. He taught me about different things. One of the reasons why he was directly at Skull and Bones in the vicinity, because every day at noon he would stand in front of the tomb, their headquarters, and yell Geronimo's name. This is a type of warrior's prayer. You do it when the sun is highest in the sky. And I stood and witnessed it.
Rad.
And I think it changed my life because I always cared about social causes. I always cared about people. And what I realized at that moment, because I was in school for anthropology, and I never was about the mainstream. So I kind of had a feeling like, oh, if I go and become an anthropologist, like they're not going to be interested in what I want to study,
Right.
They're going to call it malarkey. So, so I had that instance, and then that made it so much real for me, because here's a person who taught me about a real injustice that happened in the world. Not just that, but won by one of the most, nefarious, notorious institutions in American history. I mean, started by Alfonso Taft, and not many people know, but they were a second chapter of a German organization. So as I alluded to previously with the whole grave robbing, why would they want bones? Is it just like some kind of arrogant dominance to say like, hey, we were so much of conquerors that we can do whatever we want to these people? That might be a part of it, because I'm sure the Bush family was that arrogant. I don't like them.
Yeah, they're definitely shitheads.
Yeah, they certainly aren't liked in New Haven. They have a bad reputation, but maybe not with Yale. But so there's another element to this, because in Germany, there's not only occult activity and all this, but there's a system of magic called Teutonic magic. Have you ever heard of this?
Yes.
So in that, bones are kind of used as a talisman.
Or a scrying tool, right?
That as well. So when they fill these buildings up with the skulls of people who were significant, as in Geronimo is someone who people think about long after his death, that energy, that metaphysical attention goes to that grave. And since the grave's been robbed, that energy goes to their tomb, And I believe that type of consciousness, energy, is something that they understand, and they set this up for that exact purpose, because they're parasites. They're parasitic, and they use geomancy, which also has to do with desecrating graves and sacred sites. They use that as one of their tools amongst, the obvious things like drug smuggling and insular education of the 1% and the elite. These people suffocate themselves until they're inbred. It's terrible, and they think they have the right to rule. Well, guess what? They're not ruling us right. So that's why God made people like me. And I grew up thinking I was an atheist at some point, because I had the Roman Catholic Church thinking, trying to get me to think like this dead God was somehow gonna free me from my sins. It's ridiculous.
Especially if you eat his body and drink his blood.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a little hint, I'm working on a book now about Christianity and how it was kind of a Roman psyop. And they kind of co-opted Christianity to take the Jews, rewrite their religion so they were less rebellious. I mean, Joe Atwell has done a great job covering this whole thing. So I'm not in any way going to try to mimic his work at all. But Alex Sakaris and I plan on kind of taking it from a non-atheistic approach.
That's
because
right.
I do think that Christians need to hear this message and they might not get it from an atheist, you know, and I myself, I mean, I have Christian friends. Like I said, I was raised Roman Catholic. It's part of who I am in a way, but I also was an atheist for a long time. So when I say like, oh, I believe in God and so forth, it's only from a lot of thinking and reflecting on that. You know, it doesn't come from a place of like blind faith, you know.
Oh, yeah. You and me both. I was also an atheist for a long time, and only direct experience of the divine brought me back to a place where I was like, oh, I'm a holy being, and this is a spiritual war we're in. Okay. Like,
Yeah.
understood. But you're absolutely right about Christianity, and it seems not only to be a psyop, but like it took a whole hell of a lot of really powerful practice and knowledge and tradition and just neutered it, you know, by co-opting the dates and the times and like part aspects of the rituals, but taking out everything potent that actually worked. Because when you look back at like Judaism and you compare it to all these other traditions, they all have the exact same sort of components, and they all lead to the same sorts of messages and the same sorts of you know, epiphanies and realizations and understandings of our own divinity. And you know, whether you go to like the Vedic or the Hindu or the like alchemical or any of these things, they all have like the same principles. And what's missing that? Christianity. It's still there.
Well,
You could still find
the
it.
what's the only factor that separates the monotheistic religions from the rest? Maybe sparing like Confucianism and some of the newer religions. It's imperialism. That's it.
That's a good point.
That's the only difference. I
Yeah.
mean, every other religion is indigenous in some way, whereas we have these three religions that have been exalted and put on everybody else and spread across the world from this original, you know, cradle of civilization, so to speak. But once you get into the work of Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson, you realize that, you know, if that was a cradle of civilization, it must have been like a teenager sleeping in that cradle, because
Yeah.
you know, we're pretty old. We were pretty old at that point as human beings.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think that was by any means the beginning. So yeah, I think that the indigenous cultures are the kind of last remnants of whatever our previous fallen civilization once was. I mean, some people call that Atlantis and Lemuria and all this. I don't know if we'll ever know the answers to those questions, you know, unless you can trust someone like Edgar Sayce, who basically predicted where Atlantis was and then was proven right in the exact date that he predicted. So, you know, me, I kind of think that there is going to be evidence that comes out more and more. Whether or not we'll say for sure, oh, that was Atlantis, the one Plato described, I don't know. But
Yeah.
I think that the objective of the empire is to cut the cord between you and your original source, your connection to spirit, your connection to yourself, because that's the only way they can control us. And why this book, I like the fact that I'm doing it so much, I'm so excited about it, is because I think that this is one of the clearest cases in history for it. I mean, the Romans have done a good job of muddying the waters to the point where most people don't know, but the Dead Sea Scrolls came and shook that whole narrative up. I mean, if it wasn't for whoever dug that away and hid that away, we might not be living in this new paradigm, because when the Dead Sea Scrolls came out, I think that was kind of another one of these major points on the timeline in this whole era of the Great Reset. What do you think about that?
I absolutely agree that it opened up the possibility of a hidden truth and like the implications of that for sure. And it definitely got into a lot of people's psyches, and so it had to have played a role in some kind of awakening. But I love how you tied together that that it's imperialistic, these religions that were sort of created perhaps as a psyop, at the very least watered down from some previous version. So it's like being forced on all of these people and being like forced to spread, but also you combine that with exactly what you said, that we're like being cut off from our source, in every possible way. Like we no longer are connected to the idea that these tools have consciousness, whether they're plants or stones or crystals or the directions or these various things that we can use in our own working of our own personal magic, however you want to describe that. Like those are the things that empower us, and especially if we were still connected to like the history of our own community of that, like we've been severed from that.
They try to do it every corner. They try to sever us from our indigenous roots. That's what the colonization of the Americas did to the indigenous peoples here. It's what the colonization of Africa did to those indigenous cultures. And luckily, India was not trampled. I mean, a lot has gone on in India since the British invaded it and messed up their country. But luckily, the British weren't able to, and the Romans weren't able to, destroy any of that stuff. And I think that has elaborated a lot of the universalism that we're finding today. Because if it wasn't for that, I think the Romans would have had a monopoly on paganism, so to speak, and they would have kind of made the whole thing look bad. You get what I'm saying? Because
totally.
Greece was kind of like on the edge of that debauchery that Rome was, but they were destroyed by Rome essentially because they were better to their people, and harder to be controlled, like Rome did everywhere. I'm kind of bullying Rome here, but I think that Rome is the key for the West, because look what's happening now in modern culture. The fact that people are even saying, oh, the Pope might be arrested, as if that has anything to do with the presidential election.
Shit. Yeah.
Well, guess what? I want to tell you, it does. It absolutely does. I think that, I'm not a Q guy. I'm not trying to say that.
Yeah.
I do like to jest at that, though. I mean, because it's just ridiculous how much psyop and propaganda and disinformation is out there amongst the patriotic and caring people who do have good information. But the Vatican is at the center of a lot of these conspiracies, because the Vatican is just the publicity wing of these, Knights Templar sort of Jesuit sort of, even Freemasonic,
ancient evil cabal.
Yeah, and what that is they took something that once was good, the secret society, which once functioned as a way to protect this sacred knowledge from those who wouldn't use it wisely.
Right on.
That was polluted and flipped upside down, so that only the evil of the most evil of the evil filter to the top and get all that knowledge. Yes. And then say, okay, now turn your back on your brothers because this information is only for you. Well, that's why God made people like me and you, Lindsay, because we're coming out here and we're shining a light on all this stuff that most people don't have the time to research, unfortunately, because they're doing their 9 to 5 and trying to keep food on the table and a roof over their head. And I think that I wish I could do that a little better. I wish I was less of a researcher and better at those things, but I think that everybody has a purpose, and I think that is a part of this great reset, is there's going to be more and more people like us with information and wisdom to share,
I hope you're right, and I agree that it's a trend that I enjoy seeing more and more of, and I'm very grateful if I get to play a role in it. But I love that you pull that out about the Vatican. That does actually play a role in our society. The New World Order seems like they've got 3 sort of centers of power, and all of them are extra national. and that's the Vatican, the London, and Washington, D.C. And so it weirds me out that they're talking about making Washington, D.C. a state, because I'm like, well, wait, what happened to your trifecta of extranational like power centers then? I don't know. I don't understand what's going on with that, or why they would undo their own sort of great magic that they've played. But in that sense, the Pope is very important. I don't personally care what happens to him, but
is that a Biden change? Make DC a state?
Biden, Kamala, yeah, the Democrats basically want to make DC and Puerto Rico a state, so
they
that
could have more liberal,
more Democrats
powers.
So they basically would each. So the idea is if they bring in enough immigrants, which currently we've got this like immigrant train funded by George Soros again coming towards the border, and that Biden's going to just let them in and just, you know, here we go. Well, now we have all those many more Democratic voters. Not that they can't steal elections and haven't been doing it for who knows how many decades. But apparently this will help pad it and make it more realistic or something. And then these two states would be turned. And so then they would consistently have a majority in the Senate, the House, and at the voting polls or at the polls, and then, you know, stack the court and all this stuff. And I don't know how much of that is just sort of like right-wing paranoia, but it seems like it's already being put into action. So there's some legitimacy to it. You know, these people are seemingly actually coming to the border. There is already legislation introduced to make DC a state. So again, I don't know. I don't know how much of it is just meant to like freak people out, or how much of it is actually going to happen, or, you know, we never know.
I'll tell you what, I think that, and this is all I'll say, I think that we haven't seen the last of Trump. I think there's still a chance, because let's not forget, people, if Trump co-signs this fraudulent election, he's guilty of treason.
Yeah.
I don't think he's going to go out like that. I really don't. I don't think he's going to do that. So I have faith. But back to the
fingers crossed.
Yeah, I'm keeping the faith on that, even though I'm not really a cute person.
I'm not either, but I've always had hope that there is some sort of, even if it's just like an alternate like evil cabal. I'm like, well, I hate it. I hate that I care, and I hate that I'm like doing the lesser of two evils thing. But I'm honestly like, this is preferable. Trump is preferable to this entire other agenda I see happening. And again, I hope that's not just all psyop that got into my head and that I'm fucking duped, you know? I hold that
well, if it is, then everything's going to go back to normal according to the liberals when Biden's in. I mean, you know, normal. If you call turning everyone into a trans person normal.
Yeah, and forced vaccination and eternal muzzling and this fucking crazy inauguration that's supposed to happen, it's going to be like 30,000 troops and no civilians. I'm like, how dystopian can you get, you fucking weirdos?
Yeah.
Oh my God. And they're like, oh no, it's going to be great. Tom Hanks and J-Lo are going to be there. I'm like, oh cool. The like biggest blood-sucking child rapists are going to be there. Like, rad.
Yeah, J-Lo, the one who wore Baphomet on her chest to start COVID off, and Tom Hanks, the guy who hid in Greece because he's been so creepy on Instagram. He just couldn't help himself.
And he killed that fucking Cappy guy, I'm almost sure of it. And then fucking Gaga, who's like the whore of Babylon times a billion. Like, Jesus
Biden's
Christ.
bestie?
Yeah. They're like non-sexual harassment partners together, even though they both probably like have fucked the same child before killing it and eating it.
Yeah, Lady Gaga holds the camera for those in the Washington, you know, in the White House videos, like Creepy Joe.
Dude.
But yeah, there is another weird, so you mentioned the Vatican, the city of London and DC. There is a fourth weird place that was built.
Is it Luxembourg?
Rather recently. No, it's a new city in Kazakhstan.
Oh, Astana.
Yeah, you've heard of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I had a guy on who talked about he went there.
Wow.
Yeah, their government like hired him. He's a Mason, and he went there and he like helped. I can't even remember, dude. I can't even remember his name. He helped like decode it or like encode it or like I can't remember even. But it was a fucking pretty crazy because he goes into the because he's all about it. He was like pro Masons, pro Astana, pro New World. I had him on the show, and he what was it? It was like chance supposedly that he got invited to go there and like map it out, and like he wrote a book, and if you could read the book and decode the mystery, then you can get a free trip to Astana. I'm like, I don't want to do that. But wow.
Well, they just built it, so you're not decoding some ancient mystery. If
No.
anything, that's like a cicada test to recruit
Yes.
people, you
That's
know?
exactly what I thought. I'm like, you are a recruiter and your book is meant for gathering more people to the cause or something.
Yeah, like the
Seemed
remote
like a good
viewers.
guy. I don't
It's
think he
like,
had ill intent in his heart. You know, like, do you think that there's some people in these organizations that are sort of sent down the sort of like vanilla path and they really believe that they're just part of a fraternity that's doing doing good things, and then there's the people in like the actual like inner circles who like understand it all?
yeah, that's the only way it operates. They
Has
have
to
to
be.
have a buffer of idiots, useful idiots who are not idiots. That's too crass. What really it is they're closed-minded. They're naive. You know, they don't see the bigger picture of the world because we don't live in a society that asks those questions. So, and that's because we live in a society created by the
By
Freemasons.
them. Yeah.
So they've created a sort of test where, like, okay, most of the people will be dumb, but when the bright ones do slip through, let's make sure we catch them through our filtration system. And that's all it is. And that's why the wealthy go to the schools that they do and the poor go to the schools that they do. And the other people are stuck in between. And I think that out of all of the wealthy people now, we have that kind of system. I don't think that your local Freemasons are involved unless you have some exceptional black magician who makes his way through the ranks. I mean, I don't see that being really a possibility. What I think it is it's probably like the same thing you get with the Civil War reenactment. It's just a bunch of guys who like history and like hanging out with people who also like history. That's probably the case if you live in like a podunk town and you have a Freemason hall, you know.
Yeah.
If you live in the middle of a big city, I would imagine that now you're talking about movers and shakers and baby rapers, you know. These
Yeah.
are the types of bad people that use, I mean, that kind of symbolism in the music industry. They use it in movies, and the only reason they use it in that is because they're the culture creators. They created culture for us before they had all those tools, and then when the military made those tools, they were like, oh, why, you know, we can't just use these in the military, we have to use these on the people, you know.
Yes. Well, and
So
I totally wow, I had a thing and I lost it.
that's okay. I do have to head out now. I hate to be
Oh yeah,
jumping off
you have
so
to go.
soon,
No, it's cool.
but I'd
Well,
love to come back another time.
absolutely. I'm sure we could talk for hours about this and more, but what tell people where to go to find your podcast or anything else that you want them to go check out.
Thank you. Yeah, we just released an episode last week. One will be coming out tonight, or probably tomorrow, whenever my co-host gets to that. But you can find that at the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. Just type in My Family Thinks I'm Crazy on your podcast app. If you don't have one, go to Linktree/MFTIC and you'll find everything there, including our Patreon, which is rocking. If you join the $33 tier, I'll send you a book from my collection. So
Awesome.
check
That's
out the
so rad.
Patreon. We have a $2 tier if you're just trying to check out the content. But yeah, I'd love it for you to come on our podcast. Fingers crossed.
Anytime, dude.
You know,
Anytime.
I'd love to be back on anytime as well.
Yeah, we'll do it. Well, that's great. And do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with people before we send you on your way?
Yeah, I just want to tell people that, you know, the things are out there for you to find if you go looking for them. You know, this research is not just for people like me who have a weird life. You can learn this kind of stuff too. That's why I named my podcast My Family Thinks I'm Crazy, because I know all this stuff, but I had no one to talk about it with until I like got into podcasting. Really, I mean, my friends cared a little bit, but it was always like I was dragging them by the arm,
Yeah.
you know.
They're like,
And now,
okay, again, come on.
yeah, and now I'm like, oh, okay, this is what it's for, because there's thousands of people who actually care about what I have to say. It wasn't all for naught. So I am very grateful that we have listeners, and yeah, I just think that everybody should be pursuing improvement, and part of that is by learning new things.
Absolutely. Well said. I want to say to the chat, I'm going to stick on after the show is over, so just hold tight if you want to talk a little bit more. But fellow travelers of the path, it is a beautiful thing, and this has been your analog, electric, concentric dose of wisdom, according to the man of many skills and much wisdom, Mark Steeves of My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. Mark, thank you so much for being here and for being you.
Thank you.
Well, and you can sign off whenever you'd like if you need to. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Mystical traveling is simply our lives as they always have been, but awake and aware of the universe conspiring with us in all our intentions and energies, consciously and joyfully. This way of being is open to everyone. There is not a human that exists who cannot take this journey and experience the height of strangeness, the epitome of wonder, the most magical of occurrences, and the constant synchro roll that never lets you get off the ride until you've acknowledged the truth of your being. That you are everything there is, and that everything there is merely a reflection of you. And until you see nothing but mirrors and infinite options, travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first. Mwah. All right, so Mark had to leave early, but I wanted to, just say a few things and talk to you guys. First of all, randomly, I wanted to go back to the Indigenous comment because someone in the chat, and I'm sorry I forgot who, said Indigenous is a psyop. We're all Indigenous, and I loved that, and I wanted to bring it up, but we had so little time, and we're kept rolling, so I didn't. But it's absolutely a great point, and it's not just that it's meant to. I think there's many aspects to the PSYOP, right? Like one of them is that it's meant to disenfranchise many of us. If you're not sort of like native in the nation or country or area that you're in, then you're like not allowed to be certain types of spiritual or certain types of connected to the land or like, these types of things. And so there's something of it that like robs us, right? We forget because like you said, we are all Indigenous. 100% of humans, unless they're fucking Draco, reptilian, whatever the fuck, I don't know. But 100% of actual humans, at least, are Indigenous. We came from somewhere. And where we came from had like culture, and it had traditions, and it had connections to the land, and it had some form of, most likely, like what we might call magic, in spiritual and religious traditions. And they tend to be very similar all around the globe in very different ways, or all around the flat earth, whatever your thing is. And so we're all Indigenous, we just maybe have been disconnected from that, and maybe that's on purpose. So that's one aspect of the PSYOP, right? Like I try to go back to my roots and see like, what does my blood vibe with, like what is my genetic history? And so which cultures and geographic areas might I be more in a morphogenetic resonance with, because I think that would be the most powerful type of spiritual connection and sort of magic that we might be able to do, would be in alignment with our ancestors and our blood, and our history. And so I have like some native Japanese, I have some Native American, and I have some mutt European. So I try to like kind of try to have aspects of all those as much as I can. I'm very disconnected from it by design, right? We've all been moved around the world. We've all been moved around the world so much and so intentionally, and that's part of this PSYOP, is to disconnect us from our roots, because they're powerful, because being connected to that is powerful. Powerful spiritual magic that we can be connected to. And so I wanted to mention that because it was a very good point. And I also, the other aspect of the PSYOP that I wanted to bring up, the PSYOP of the term Indigenous, is that we start to not only like otherize the Indigenous. We're like, oh, they're Indigenous, even if we like, whether we kind of like fetishize that or whether we kind of like look down on it. And I think those are kind of the two prominent dispositions in our culture, in our American culture, no matter what color or race you are or whatever, is to either fetishize Native Americans or like kind of like distance yourself almost and like have a sort of like arrogance or something. I don't know, whatever that is towards natives. So both of those are they're not realistic and they're dehumanizing in a way, right? And so many people do this, and I get very disappointed consistently. But it's so easy to do because we have it all around us. But honestly, the fetishization bothers me more because there's very few people left who like think Native Americans aren't good enough or aren't cool or like are weird or different. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of like a dying racist tendency it's just not as prominent anymore. But the fetishization is like a real thing. And it's so common and so consistent. You see it everywhere, right? People will say things like, oh, the Native Americans honored the Two-Spirit. And so, like, people of Two Spirits are sacred in Native traditions. And you're like, okay. So even if that were true for a tribe or two, which tribe is it that honored the Two Spirits? Does anybody know? Nobody knows. What actually is a Two-Spirit in that tribe's setting, right? Does anybody know? Nobody knows. Who the fuck decided that all natives everywhere, 100% of them, 100% of the time, honored the Two Spirits? Nobody did. There's no record of it. There's no tribe it's associated with. There's no way of knowing. And even if, then this is the other thing that happens, is people just like see a native person, you know, and they're just like, oh, you're native, so you're like spiritual and special and like, you're like fucking whatever. And I'm like, that's disgusting. Remember the guy at the Covington Kid or whatever, the drum beating fucking thing with the MAGA hat and the kid, and like he actually won defamation and got all this money, which is fucking rad. Well, that instance was somewhere in Washington, D.C., right? This native guy, you know, all he had to do was hold a drum and beat it. And the whole country was like, oh, he's native. Oh, it's amazing. Like, he's so spiritual and special and protected. And like, that's fetishization. You took this guy and he looked a certain way. It's pretty racist, honestly. And you put him up on a pedestal and you decided that everything he did was magical and good because we fetishize Native Americans and indigenous people. So this is the other side of the indigenous psyop, right? And so, you know, people ran with that. Turns out that guy was like, you know, a drunk and a drug addict and like a dishonorably discharged or something. Like he had all this history of like very shady, like kind of dishonest shit. And he was just most likely hired to go make that optic, you know, to go get that fucking snapshot and that video piece so people could like, you know, run with the anyone who likes Trump is racist narrative that they created on purpose. And they used that fetishization and that psyop of indigenous to like cloud everybody's mind because you never want to diss native people. Like their culture is amazing and special and wonderful and can never be like criticized. And it's like, that's just as fucked up as disliking native people or thinking that native people are stupid or wrong or like, I don't know what racists think, you know, savage or something, right? They're both just as fucked up because both of them require that you completely divorce from the human aspect and the reality and you make this fantasy and that's all you look at instead of the reality, right? They're both disgusting. So I wanted to bring up that aspect too, this fetishization. It's very, very common. I think if we look at ourselves, because when I first thought about this concept, I was like, holy shit, I do that all the time. I was like, I just put native culture on this pedestal and anything that comes from any native tribe anywhere is like an amazing fucking spiritual insight and just truth and like no one should ever criticize it. And it's like, that's just as disgusting, right? And eventually I went and I lived on a Native American reservation for a year and I was very lucky to do so. And you know, it's a different culture. It's like being in a foreign country. It is technically a sort of like a foreign country within our own country. And it's a different world and it was amazing. And I was very lucky to be able to experience that. And at the same time, like native people are exactly like any other person I've ever met. Like all humans are very similar, you know, and, you know, there's just a lot of like demystification that happened, you know, because I went in with my white liberal trained ways and I was like, Native American, da da da. And all my students, which were literally 100% Native because it was on the reservation, were like, Miss Brown, you do not have to say Native American. We call ourselves Indians. I was like, you do? You know, and like in my brain, like that's racist. But like, is it racist if a Native calls themselves Indian? Why would it be, right? That's what they want to fucking call themselves. So that's what they call themselves. So I started calling them Indian too. And it was like so weird for me. I had to like, you know, like quiet my fucking frantic heart and mind because it was screaming at me that I was being racist. But I had to like unlearn and relearn this shit because I think it's super racist that we're like this divorced from an actual culture, that we just like make this picture of it in our mind and we're like, they like to be called Native American. Isn't it fucked up to think that you know what an entire multi-varied, many different groups, some of which had nothing to do with each other, and 100% of them are the same and they all want to be called this? Like, isn't that ridiculous? But this is how many of us are raised and taught and trained. You know, and it took a bit of getting used to this sort of demystification and unlearning all of this shit that I had been trained through. It really is a psyop. And so whoever said that was absolutely right in the chat. I'm sorry. Again, you probably already said it was me and I missed it because I'm just talking. But it comes up a lot. It comes up especially when people, like I said, the most recent one I can remember was for like the last 2 years or more, people have been saying like, natives recognize the two-spirit. And I'm like, that's an ignorant statement. 100% of natives recognize the two-spirit? No, they didn't. No, they didn't, period. Maybe a tribe did here and there. Maybe many tribes did have various different names and ideas for the idea of being transgender, transsexual, or whatever. It's totally possible. But just to say like natives did this is ridiculous. So yeah, there's that. And yeah. Res life is hard living. That's right. Since we're on this informal part of the episode, I'm going to say what's up to some people and go back in the chat a little bit. Oh, I think it was Trap a Skunk who said that Indigenous is a psyop. Absolutely true. And and honestly, a lot of the Native people I met like just laughed their asses off at how stupid white people were, because white people would come there and be like, oh my God, every single thing you've ever done that you call art is amazing. And it's like, there's Native art that is amazing. I'm not trying to talk shit. I'm just saying like how stupid it is to think that like there's some sort of uniformity or monolithic nature to any group of people, especially something as varied as the like thousands of tribes, if not more, that filled up just the North American continent, right? Let alone like other parts of the world. So yeah, we've got Regan Rempel in the house. What's up, Regan? We have Love in the Midst in the house. We've got Gordon Hamill. We've got Lindsay Smith. All the best people. Trap a Skunk, like I said. Gordon Hamill, I don't know if I said hello to you yet or not. Wisdom Trek is here. What's up? Yes, I'm glad that you enjoy my endings. People are like, how do you know what you're gonna say ahead of time? I'm like, I write stuff, it just comes out, and this is often how I write my books and my poems too. I just sit down and my like mind goes lax in a way, and I just like spit out some shit, and then I do the episode and I'm like, that's why that ending came out. Like, it all fits together so nicely. And I'm just very, very lucky. Mateo's in the house. Right. And that is the thing that I was trying to point out too, is that we are all indigenous. We all come from indigenous cultures. We all come from this earth. And whatever this parasite culture is that has destabilized and intentionally manipulated us to disconnect us from source, would love for us to forget that and divide and keep moving around and keep displacing ourselves and keep mixing all our shit up so that we can never be reconnected to the earth and to ourselves and to each other, because that's where we are the strongest. Is in our connection to Earth and ourselves. And so there's a reason why we've been disconnected from the concept that we are all indigenous, and why indigenous has been made to be this like mystical, distant, untouchable, monolith of fucking greatness or whatever. That's like very strange. Jerry Young's in the house. What's up, Jerry Young? Yes, that's exactly right. Trappaskunk says again with another smashing insight that the New Age has infiltrated Native culture. They've co-opted Native culture, and they're not apologetic about it, and they're not intelligent about it. They're not thoughtful about it. They don't do any research. There's no evidence to most of their claims. And the sad thing is, there's a lot of Native people who have, sort of capitalized on this trend, So, for example, people will be like, oh, well, I heard it from a Native person. It's like, well, I've met a lot of Native people having lived on a reservation, and some are very smart and very well, educated in their own traditions and culture and history, and others are just shitmongers who want to fucking weave a tale and want your attention and maybe even your money or like sex or whatever it is they can get from you. Because just like anywhere, anytime, in any group of people, some people are shitheads. And some people are not. So just to say like a Native told me, or I heard it from a Native, or like la la la, is like, okay, I mean, there's one source of infinite sources. So maybe it has some bearing and maybe it has none. And it's just good to be discerning and take it as a possibility, Anyway, so there's that too. That's dangerous. I think I said what's up to Jerry Young. Bonnie's in the house. What's up, Bonnie? Yeah, that kid, whatever his name was, the Covington kid, sued the Washington Post and more, right? CNN, all sorts of, and he won at least one, and I never heard about the other ones since then. But like, that kid's gonna be rich for the rest of his life. And I remember at the time, like, I was so proud of him because I teach kids for a living. I did for much of my life. For 14 years or more, I worked with that exact sort of age group, middle school and high school, mostly high school. And so I know them pretty well, and I was one, as you were. And so if we remember back to that time, all know them pretty well. But you can maybe remember, I can remember, and I can see my students and their lack of impulse, or their impulsiveness and their lack of impulse control. And if someone came up to me and was smashing their drum in my face, I would grab it and rip it out of their fucking hands and beat them over the head with it. That's what I would do. Even now, like, I think that would be my response. If it wasn't to like trip him and push him back away from me, because someone being in my face that close, I would take as a very aggressive move, and I would move to defend myself. And I don't know how a court of law would see that, but that would most likely be my response. And I think it would be many humans' response, because I think many of us would take that as a direct, aggressive invasion of our personal space and threat. And that kid is a kid, and he didn't do anything. And I was so proud. I was like, I don't think I would be capable of that. I really don't. And people looking at it for some reason just gave that Native guy a wash because he was Native. That's racist. That is racist. To give somebody an excuse for their behavior because of the color of their skin is racist. And so this kid, who just so happened to be white and just so happened to be wearing a red hat and may or may not even like Trump, but is just like, kids, like, that's another thing. Like, he could be wearing that hat because everyone around him seems to be, and that's what seems fitting. Like, he might not even fucking care. It's just so stupid to think that we understand his mind or his point of view. Anyway, he didn't do shit. He didn't fucking grab the drum. He didn't hurt the guy. He didn't push the guy. He didn't yell at the guy. He just stood there. And people were so mad that he smirked. And I'm like, was that a smirk? Or was it like the barely contained terror of being confronted by this fucking person while all of your peers stare at you. I don't know if you, again, remember teenagers, but that's terrifying to be the center of attention of all of your peers, especially when something very strange and unexpected is happening. You know, you don't know if you're doing the right thing or not, and it's terrifying. I had so much compassion for him because, again, I know kids and I teach kids. And if that happened to one of my students, I would be very emotional about it because it's super aggressive and very difficult to do the right thing under those circumstances. And I think he did exactly the right thing. I'm so proud of him. And I'm so grateful that he got vindicated, even though no one knows. If you weren't like sort of already on his side or whatever, you don't know that happened because the news stopped talking about it. Anyway, I didn't mean to go off about Covington Kid, but talking about Indigenous and Natives, you know. Trap a skunk is an Indian. Oh, see, like, I don't get to be an Indian. I don't get to claim my Native American heritage because I don't have proof. Except by, like, genetic testing, which doesn't tell you your tribe, but, like, no one cares, you know? So I just, like, I say I'm of the lost tribe. My dad was adopted, and it was a closed adoption. And so even though he was ridiculously clearly Native American, it will never matter. So I take what I can from various traditions and things that have honestly been given to me through synchronicity. So I'm like, well, there's life giving me back my little connection, right? It all works out in the end. I'm glad I can redeem YouTube for you. Ooh, Lindsay Smith is on chapter 10 of Sine Curve of the Aeons. That's fucking rad, dude. I'm sorry, I'm biased because I wrote these books, but like, I didn't actually write these books. I did write these books, but like I described earlier, like this shit just kind of rolls out of me, and it actually came from this guy here. And I'm just really lucky to be like a conduit to this story. So like, I think it's okay that I say that I fucking love this story. I read this book. I wrote the book, but I've read it like, I don't even know, probably like 10 times, and it's kind of big. I don't know if you noticed, Lindsay Smith, but it's a long kind of book. So I'm glad. And I think, Lindsay Smith, if I'm not mistaken, that you read you read the sequel first. You can read the sequel in either order. Earth, A Trough in Time is the sequel, and you can read them in any order. So I don't remember if you're... Oh, no, I think it was Bonnie who read. Anyways, I am very honored that you guys are reading my books. They're super fun, super awesome. If you like the things that I talk about when I'm alone on the channel, then you will love the book. The books. And I'm a couple chapters into the third book in the series, so get ready. White genocide rhetoric seems to be making a comeback, says Jerry Young. It is very interesting that it's just not cool or okay to be white. It's been true for a long time, though. I don't know if you guys relate to that, but ever since I was young, it was like not very cool to be white. It was way cooler to be anything but white. And maybe that's just because my town was very white, and, you know, that same fetishization thing of anything that's different. But Chris Phoenix is in the house. What's up, Chris? Isn't that funny? Bonnie, you need to get a copy. Oh, I thought you already had them. Oh, of the other book. I got some here ready to sign for you if you want to buy them. They're on the site, rogueways.org. Go to the shop and then books and art, and then you can get a signed copy. It's not just signed. I write you a little special message that's just for you. Straight from heaven. Or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, see? Bonnie used to pray that she would wake up Hispanic or black. It is wild. And I mean, there's something to it that like you just want to be what you're not. Like I always wanted to have glasses and curly hair. Like it didn't, you know, if I had glasses and curly hair, I'd want straight hair and no glasses. Like I think there's something to that too. But I don't know. I don't know how much of this like anti-white sentiment has been sort of like seeded since we were kids, maybe even before, and like is growing and like blooming now, you know? Like I'm not sure. I just have seen those trends for a while. Project Cheney is in the house. I don't know if that's Cheney, but what's up? So the other thing that I wanted to mention is, of course, the Capitol right now is being, you know, fucking like smothered in just completely militaristic police state, aggro fucking overload. Like there's like fences, there's razor wire on the fences, there's like blockades, there's apparently 30,000 National Guard troops there. They're just like sleeping on the ground. There's nowhere for them to even sleep. Like I doubt there's shower facilities, or, you know, like these people are like, I just feel kind of bad for them. So thank you. Lindsay Smith said the book flows. So it doesn't feel long. It feels good, I think, which is a very nice compliment. Oh, and if you're someone who's read the book, please go review it on Amazon. And if you want to read the reviews for the book I wrote while I was on the reservation, those are pretty horrific. They're full of hate and vitriol, and they're kind of hilarious. So you can go check that. I don't know if I've ever told that story, but most reviews I've ever got, most books I've ever sold of any book, all of them hateful. Everybody bought it in order to read it so that they could review it and leave hate reviews. So very interesting. That's one of my first books, called A Gypsy on the Res. But back to the Capitol. So we've got this major police state overload going on there, and it's hard to say why it's going on, right? The narrative is that this is going on to protect Joe Biden in the inauguration from right-wing extremists, although it's very obvious that that makes no sense, right? No, there is no... Remember, we heard talk of going to the Capitol on the 6th for, weeks, if not more? And you saw it, I saw it, and I'm not even in these circles, right? Saw it on Twitter, I saw it on Facebook, I saw it just everywhere. There was just talk of people going there. It was a plan, and we all knew it was going to happen. There's no doubt that the Secret Service, like our intelligence, like all these people knew it was going to happen. They probably knew how many people were going to be there. Like they're not stupid, and they have eyes everywhere and control of everything. So of course they knew, right? And we didn't have this response then. So, and there's clearly not anything planned like that, not of that size or nature, right? I'm sure there's people, I'm sure there's little groups, I'm sure there's like things, but nothing like that, nothing like 250,000 or more people converging, right? So why now? Why this? It's not right-wing threat. It's not domestic terrorism threat, right? It's just not realistic to believe that. And so what is it? Well, like a lot of people are saying, it could be like the whole Q thing, and that Trump is going to actually finally take down, you know, Biden pedophilia cabal. I don't know. That could happen. That'd be pretty fucking rad. I would like definitely cheer, and my fingers are crossed. I hope that that's true. And the other side of that coin, which is, I won't say it's more likely because I don't know, but it seems more fitting with our history, would be that this is just primed for an attack from a foreign government or a false flag or both. So we have to be ready for that. And we have to know that most people will fall for it, as they fall for anything, just like the Covington kid, just like the siege on the Capitol, and just like COVID. Most people will be stupefied into retardation and won't think at all. And so we have to be ready for that. So I guess I wanted to put that out there so that we're all thinking about and aware of the possibility that things will get very confused for a while, and that it might be pretty horrific. Who knows? It might be nothing. We might just have their stupid Tom Hanks party and like move on. I don't know. But it just seems like they're prepping pretty hard for some really intense emotional, whatever you want to call it, harvesting. I have hopes, as always, that us knowing about it and not agreeing and not consenting kind of diffuses it, just like we talked about when Cheney came out and talked about her time at the Capitol, that there's good magic going on and there's diffusing magic going on. There's just our non-consent and our awareness of what they intend and our not going along with it that will sort of make it like fall apart and fizzle out, and then maybe nothing would happen, right? That's possible too. So I have very high hopes for that. I have very high hopes that even better things are happening and that there really are a ton of good guys that have been working to like seize this moment and like take out the worst of the worst. Those could all happen. I did see a video of like 20 Black Hawk helicopters and massive military planes all flying in like formation over DC. Like it just seems like a fucking war zone there, and it's pretty intense. I saw the New York Times had signaled that there might be fake domestic terror attacks under that were actually being perpetrated by, they didn't say, they just said foreign hostile nations. So that's interesting when the New York Times is saying that and admitting that false flags, happen, and that domestic terrorism could be a sort of vehicle for that. Especially because domestic terrorism seems like the New York Times is, and that whole side, the whole liberal sort of agenda, it seems like they're basically tool that they've been using. Like they've been like amping up the domestic terrorism thing seemingly so that they could like take out any opposition to their very liberal agenda, right? So they've been like using, but now they're saying like, oh, it could be used as a false flag. So you're like, well, weird. You're like undermining your own tool by admitting that it could be used by a foreign hostile nation or otherwise as a vehicle for a false flag. You know what I'm saying? So it's interesting. So it just makes me wonder, like, are they worried? Are they scared? Are they like, oh shit, we set this all up and it might be used against us? There was also the thing where they talked about how they're worried that these National Guardsmen will turn against them, and so they want them disarmed. And so now people are talking about how half these guys don't even have weapons or guns or whatever, which may or may not be true. There was definitely an image like prominent in some magazine or newspaper or other where like the scope was like attached under the muzzle, like upside down or something. And it's like, okay, so it's clearly like people are either dumb and don't know how to use guns, or this is a fake photo, or like, like, I don't know what's going on with these troops and their weapons. And it is interesting that some of these politicians have voiced out loud their fear that these people could be used against them, which gives me some hope, honestly, but very interesting, right? So it's hard to know which pieces of these are put there so that we will look at them and hope for certain things or think certain things. It's hard to know. It's hard to know which of these are actually real and happening, It's easy to see that the sheep have been fooled and just are, believing this is all Trump terrorist shit, and that that Joe Biden and the Capitol are under very real threat from this whatever insanity with like no evidence at all, because logic has nothing to do with it for them. So that's all that. So we're like looking at December 20th, right? Or January 20th as the possible day. And I was just talking with Athen Kamenti. He'll be on the show within the next week or so, and we were talking about, so it'll be after that day, but we were talking about that day, and the timing of it astrologically really emphasizes some power, sort of like traditional and foundational, like old power, and this like new sort of surging rebellion energy at odds with each other. So it's like, unfortunately, the energy of that day is also very much in that vein of things, and so that's emphasized. And finally, I wanted to say that I posted it a bunch, so you may have seen it, but you heard it here first. I was looking at this new variant. It's B11.7, and this is the new variant of COVID, allegedly, right? We know they love their number games and their stupid bullshit. And so I was like, well, what are they playing with this one, right? B117, like, what does it mean to them? And then it hit me that B is 2, 7 obviously is 7 plus 2 is 9, and so that makes 9/11. And so this new variant, right, is already encoded for their stupid false flag bullshit, and so it's obviously stupid false flag bullshit. So that's the B11.7 variant, however you say it, B117 or whatever variant of COVID. So we already know that that's fake just by decoding their stupid names, right? Because if it was a new variant, why wouldn't it be like COVID-19-2 or SARS-CoV-3 or like anything else, right? But this new name gives them the ability to encode. So there we go. The point of bringing that up, not only so you know that I thought of that myself, but only because I stand on the shoulders of giants, really. But anyways, that January 17th, therefore, is also perhaps encoded there. Because if you look at January 17th, it has the 117 is in there, right? 1 being January, 17 being January 17th, right? And B might be like plan B, like the other shit didn't work out, so let's go with plan B or whatever. I don't know. I'm just pointing out that we're looking at the 20th, but we might be expecting something on the 17th as well. That's just pure conjecture based on random synchronicity and coincidence, but I wanted to throw it out there because my friend Brian pointed it out, and I was like, that's actually a really good point. That really could be something. So let's just know that whatever forces are converging here and whatever their intended outcomes are, we always want to be in the place where we are not emotionally invested in it. You know, to have some hope for the best outcome, cool. To have your intentions for how you want things to go, rad. But to be like worried or to be stressed or to be angry or to be like sad and depressed or to be like really even overjoyed, like any of these emotions, if we're like putting that into that day, we're giving that energy to them for them to pull off whatever they want to pull off. So I always just encourage, like, it's better to kind of think ahead about all the ways they can do this so that we can get more and more like objective and detached from it. Detached in a good way, you know, where we're just not invested in it. We're not giving them our energy, and do spend time visualizing your best version of the outcome of these things, you know, and especially in a way where you are not doing it emotionally, actively emotionally, right? You want to do that thing where you like visualize it and you imagine how good it will feel to have that thing be the outcome, right? You're like, oh, in my best world, like Trump comes in and takes out all the pedophiles and or whatever, maybe someone else says, I don't care, you know, and like blah blah blah, whatever that is, and you're like, wow, that would feel so joyous, it would feel so good, oh, everybody would be so happy. Like imagining that emotion and feeling that emotion in that way is great. But if you're like thinking about the event itself, what they have planned, and even if you're like, oh, fuck them, I'm so angry, you're like adding that energy, right? We talked about that in the episode about resistance being futile. You don't want to add your resistance to their energy flow. You really just want to not be attached to it. Say, I don't consent to any of this. I'm going to use my energy and my emotion for something else entirely. I'm going to create what I want instead of paying attention and giving you energy for what you want. And so being aware that the 17th could be a day, I think is important, just so that you're not taken by surprise and therefore have your energy rushed in with all. Do you know what I mean? Like if you know that it might be coming on the 17th instead of the 20th, then you can be like less caught up in that bullshit flow. So I think that was all I wanted to bring up. Sorry I didn't have visuals and articles this time because I wasn't expecting our interview to be so short, and so I didn't even know I would get to talk to you guys about these things, but I wanted to throw all that out there because it has been on my mind. And yeah, I love you guys, and I want you to be the best you can be and be as prepared as possible, and be the shining examples of beautiful humanity that you are. So that's why we're all here together as we are. So it's nice to be here with you. That is right. Trappaskunk says the war is for our souls and minds. Bye-bye, Gordon. See you later. Yeah, it's for our souls and minds, and we aren't giving them our soul energy or our mental energy, right? But yes. Chris got on the Jesus train. It's cool, Chris. I think most people here love Jesus along with you. We may all have our different ways of expressing it, but... Tacatus Moonblade's in the house. He said, instead of a spider web, let's make a quilt. I love that. It's like the network in like layers all joined together as one. Nice metaphor. Yeah, yeah. That's right. Don't feed the parasite king. All right, perfect. So thank you guys again for being here and being you. Look forward to some awesome episodes coming up. We've got Dr. Mary Helen Hensley coming up, talking about after life, after death stuff. We've got Howdy Mikowski. I'm super excited about that. He would have been on already, but we had to reschedule. But super rad if you haven't looked at Howdy's work. Michael Wan is actually the one who told me about Howdy. And I asked him if he wanted to be on the show, and he said yes. I'm very excited. He does a lot of Tartaria, ancient history sort of stuff, but with like a different spin and some different examples than you might be used to, but also some, spiritual and esoteric woven in there that's really fun as well. So I'm very excited about that. We've got Athen Commenti, like I said, coming up. And... Ooh, Matt Landman is coming back this month, finally. It's been a grip. We haven't had Matt on for a while. Oh no.
Mind is elusive, time is exclusive, round trip all inclusive, the island is abusive, Jekyll's wearing hides in plain sight lines, heckle devils blind by strange slight lines, slight designed as their own resource, if they control the narrative there's no recourse, prophecies diseased by a strong overreach, time ain't a seat that sits idly by while breach, watching bodies wither as they slither like a sailed river on a land of which they don't own a sliver, fatal error and avoidance, symbiosis, lack of focus, to understand balance from the rover to the lotus, from light to the dopest, gifted through osmosis, luminance went out a while ago, they didn't notice, masturbating currency, squatting in the dark chamber, disconnected from Akasha, watching dissipate the vapors.
You still don't get it, do you, boys? There ain't no countries anymore, no more good guys, they're running the whole show, they own everything, the whole goddamn planet, they can do whatever they want. What's wrong with having it good for a change? Now they're gonna let us